Well, no, fine. So I think 4 chairs is enough. Thanks. Welcome, everyone, to this talk discussion on the book, "The Active Non-Alignment Option in Latin America: Foreign Policies in the New Global Order." Doris could not be with us from the very beginning because she had to attend a last-minute meeting at the rectory, but she will be joining us shortly. So we would like to thank Chile 21. We would like to thank Foreign Policy Forum and the Chinese Embassy. The Chinese ambassador is without sharing with us today. So I will present briefly our speakers today. First, the authors of the book. We have today Professor Jorge Heine. He's Professor of International Relations at the Boston University, former ambassador of Chile in China, in India, and South Africa. We also have Professor Carlos Fortín, Professor and researcher from the University of Sussex, and former Deputy Secretary of the UNCTAD. And we also have with us today Carlos Ominami, former Minister of Economy and former senator as well. And we have 2 friends from China today with us. We have Professor Chen Zulong. I'm not sure if I'm Zulong. Okay. Chen is professor of the School of International Relations and Executive Vice Director of the Institute of National Security and Governance, University of International Business and Economics. He used to be director of the Center of International Strategic Studies of the China Institute of International Studies, directed under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Currently, he's a member of several national research associations, such as the China Council of Experts and the BRICS think tanks. Today, he's going to talk about the active non-alignment and the community of shared future for mankind. So welcome, Shen. It's a pleasure for us. Our second guest today from China will be Xiang Xixue. He's a senior research fellow of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and distinguished professor and director of the Center of Latin American Studies at the Shanghai University. His research areas include Chinese foreign policy, international relations, world economy, global governance, BRICS, Europe, and Latin America. He served as deputy director of the Institute of Latin American Studies. Currently, he's also vice president of the China Council of Experts. So now I'll leave you with our friends, with the authors of the books, in the same order I present you. If you want, first Jorge, then Carlos Fortín, and then Carlos Ominami.
Thank you very much, Professor López. In the first place, let me thank the Institute of International Studies of the University of Chile, its director, Dr. Dorotea López, for hosting this book talk, as well as the Foreign Policy Forum and the China 21 Foundation for both sponsoring. We're especially indebted to the Embassy of China, to Ambassador Mao here next to me, who joins us here today and will close the proceedings. For me, to the dialogue with our Chinese colleagues in Beijing, have already mentioned and that honor us with their presence. The book that brings us together today, that you can see here on the podium, and that we co-edited with my colleagues, Carlos Fortín and Carlos Ominami, was published in November of 2021 by Catalonia here in Santiago, and has had a good run. We have had launches in 5 countries, in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Peru, and Canada, and positive reviews, over 1,000 reviews in leading journals such as Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and Nexos in Mexico, among others. And it is revealing that in the past 1 year after its publication, in the past 3 weeks, this is the 3rd book talk we had. We had a book talk on this book in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University on 30 November. We then had another in Madrid on the 7th December, sponsored by a French journal, the Grand Continent. And this is the 3rd one. So there's little doubt that the book has elicited considerable interest. We published a 3rd article on the topic in a scholarly journal in November in the journal Política Exterior in Madrid. And as you can see in the back, the English edition of the book will be published by Anthem Press in London and in New York on 7 February. Given that this talk is being held in English, we regard this as the first event for the English edition of our book. And as Professor Jiang Shui mentioned, it would be great if we could have one on a Mandarin edition of the book in the not too distant future. But let me zero in on the very concept of active non-alignment, which is what brings us together today. The notion of active non-alignment was first put on the table in 2019 and was developed in 2020 in response to the US-China struggle for primacy, in which Latin America was caught in the middle. We regard this book and this proposal as a bit of a manifesto, calling for countries in the region not to give in to pressures either from Washington or Beijing and stick to their own interests. The proposal puts a strong emphasis on strong cooperation and on multilateralism as the way forward for a region that is at risk, as we put it, of being essentially moved, pushed from the periphery to utter marginality, given the crisis which the region has been going through over the past few years, that ECLAC has called the worst crisis in Latin America in 120 years. These are very difficult times, very troubled times in the world, but particularly in Latin America. We are in. Now, there are some parallels between the notion of active non-alignment and the notion of strategic autonomy that has been put forward in Europe, particularly by President Emmanuel Macron and by the High Representative for Defense and Foreign Policy, Mr. Joseph Borrell. But while strategic autonomy is anchored in issues of defense policy and is essentially defensive, ANA is both much broader, covering political, economic, and social issues. It is also essentially proactive as opposed to defensive in nature. It looks out for opportunities in a changing world and looks for not being cajoled, not being pushed into lining up systematically with one or another of the great powers. Now, an important notion here is that of alignment. Why is the notion of alignment so important? And it is different from the word alliance. Alliance, again, has a strong military component. NATO is an alliance, a military alliance. When we're talking about alignment, we are not talking about a military association. What we're talking about is essentially an umbrella, multidimensional term that provides the missing link between the structure of the international system, what does the international system look like at any given moment? And on the other hand, the processes at the behavioral level of the units. How do the units behave given the structure of the system? So what we are saying is that in the current shifting international system, what we have is an emerging bipolar situation of tensions between the two great powers, the United States and China. And the question then becomes, what should Latin American countries do? How should they react? How should they act given this situation? And when we combine the notion of alignment, this umbrella concept that refers to the system and its units, with the notion of active, of being proactive, looking for opportunities in terms of what to do, we grasp what this notion is all about. Now, this notion draws, in addition to the long-standing traditions of the non-aligned movement, that of course had its first meeting, the meeting that gave rise to the very seeds of the movement in Bandung at the conference in 1955 in Indonesia. I was fascinated recently by the fact that the meeting of the G20 was held in Indonesia again, and the president of Indonesia made references to the non-alignment tradition going back to those days of President Sukarno in the 1950s. And he referred to it. There were other references as well. The foreign minister of Singapore has mentioned that nowadays we need an economic non-alignment in the world, given the tensions that exist between the great powers. But more broadly, what we are seeing in today's world, and this is something that is often not really put front and center in the debates on the subject, is that we're moving towards a very different world. The World Bank has talked about a wealth shift from the North Atlantic to the Asia Pacific. As some of you may know, one of my favorite statistics is that there are more billionaires in Beijing today than there are in New York City. Now, if anybody had said this would happen 10 or 20 years ago, he would have been laughed out of the room. But this is a key indicator of which way the wealth has been shifted. Now, what does that mean? It means that the old notions of the third world have been replaced by those of the global south, what is referred today as the global south. And in terms of diplomatic activity, what the third world engaged in the days of the old non-aligned movement was something called the diplomatie de cahier de doléances, that is grievance diplomacy. We are poor. We need money from the North. The North must pay for colonial exploitation. And we demand transfers of resources big time from the North to the South. That was the policy de cahier de doléances. What is the situation today? It is very different. We have what is known as collective financial statecraft. That is, the resources today are more and more in, well, the global south. We have entities like the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank, located in Beijing, where our colleagues are. We have the New Development Bank, located in Shanghai, one with $100 billion worth of capital, the other with $50 billion worth of capital, that have been around since 2015 and have been very active and very effective. So it's a whole new ballgame in which the old third world has been replaced by a new south that has many resources, that is not asking for transfers of resources from the north. What it wants is trade, access to markets, and, well, engage with the global economy. And we see this fascinating situation in which the old champions of free trade, the countries of the north, the United States, the United Kingdom, are now retreating into protectionism. They are against free trade. They talk about fair trade. Now, this is extraordinary. It used to be that third world countries would ask for fair trade. And now it is some of the leading economies in the Anglo-Saxon world that are asking for fair trade. So it's been quite a change. Now, in those terms, it is important to realize there are important differences between active non-alignment and neutrality. Neutrality means basically not taking positions on issues, staying away from international organizations. Switzerland was not a member of the EU, wasn't even until recently a member of the United Nations. It stayed away from international issues and controversies. Well, active non-alignment is not about that. Active non-alignment takes positions on issues and will evaluate every issue on its merits and take decisions accordingly. So what it is about is not about aligning mechanically, systematically with one or another of the big powers. Now, what is remarkable, and one of the things that the reviewers of the book have commented upon, they have said, some of them have said, this is not so much a future-oriented proposal as a finding of present behavior, of present reality. And we have one case that I find extraordinarily revealing. Today, the president of Ecuador, Mr. Guillermo Lasso, finds himself in Washington, D.C. He has negotiated, the government of Ecuador has negotiated a free trade agreement with China. President Lasso has said that this agreement is about to be signed any moment now, that basically everything is ready. Now, the interesting thing is that the government of Ecuador wanted to sign a free trade agreement with the United States, but was told that that wasn't on the table because the United States is not signing free trade agreements these days. But having negotiated a free trade agreement with China, President Lasso in Washington, D.C. today is in a much stronger negotiating position for asking things from Washington that you wouldn't get otherwise. One could argue, in fact, that he might not even have gotten this visit if he had not negotiated this free trade agreement with China. So this is, he doesn't call it that way, but this is, we see it as active non-alignment in practice. Now, in addition to this proposal for Latin America, what we have found quite remarkable, that the book was published in November of 2021. The war in Ukraine started in February of 2022. And what we have seen in these past 10 months is that the reaction of many countries in the global south, in Africa, in Asia, and also in Latin America, have taken a page from non-alignment and have taken positions, India, for example, on the war, of strict neutrality, of not taking sides in the war. Many other countries, Indonesia, Pakistan, South Africa, have taken similar positions. And if you read the mainstream English language press, you will find it is full of references to what they call the resurgence of non-alignment. In the New York Times, in Foreign Policy, in the Washington Post, you will find articles describing what is happening. There is a revival of non-alignment, and I'm closing here. There is a very interesting word that has been coined by the German Chancellor, Mr. Olaf Scholz, that is Zeitenwende. I happen to speak German. The great advantage of the German language is you can put words together, and like Weltanschauung or Fingerspitzengefühl. Well, Zeitenwende is one such term. Zeit, of course, is time. Wende is change. He is arguing that we're living in an age of an epochal change from one type of international system to another. And what we would argue is that far from weakening the argument for active non-alignment, this change, this tightening, strengthens it. Active non-alignment provides a useful compass, a guide to action in a turbulent world, opening the possibility of finding a common posture in Latin America, one which would also strengthen relations with the rest of the world. There would, of course, be no agreement in Latin America on signing up, either with Washington, Beijing, or Moscow. And in that sense, ANA, active non-alignment, remains the most effective options in this setting. All of this acquires an additional momentum with the so-called second pink wave that is taking place in Latin America, whose latest manifestation has been the election of President Lula in Brazil. Senator Amorim, Lula's foreign minister for 8 years, as the concluding chapter in our book on Brazil and the Global South. I would argue that our manifesto for active non-alignment is resonating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. Let me also start by thanking the colleagues here in China who have organized this encounter. My own area of interest and work being international economic relations, I would like now to suggest some ways in which the active non-alignment doctrine can help developing countries in general and Latin America in particular to navigate the challenges that are posed by the current economic context. This, as you know, is one in which, on the one side, globalization is undergoing crisis, resulting from the emergence of economic nationalism, particularly in the advanced developed countries, and also by the pandemic, with its corollary of disruption of trade flows and of production value chains. And on the other hand, it is marked by the conflict between the United States and China, which the US has defined explicitly as a hegemonic dispute about who will write the rules of the globalized economy and who will run it. Now, within this broad panorama, there are two phenomena which emerge, which I believe have systemic implications and on which I would like to concentrate. The first one is what has been called the geopoliticization of international economic relations. By that is meant the idea of giving priority to security, defense, and geostrategic aspects over pure economic ones. Economic policy decisions and options are evaluated not with criteria of efficiency and equity, but in terms of their potential impact on the geopolitical balance. As is well known, this approach was introduced by the Trump administration, which began to define US-China relations in the area of trade and technology with geopolitical parameters. An iconic instance, as is also well known, is the Trump administration's accusation in 2019 that the Chinese company Huawei, one of the world's largest suppliers of mobile network telecommunications equipment, was including in its products functions that would allow them to carry out espionage for the Chinese government. And in May of that year, it included Huawei in the blacklist of firms with which the US companies are prohibited from trading. One was expecting that the Biden administration would change this approach, but it hasn't. It has remained in the Biden administration. It has confirmed the blacklisting of Huawei and expanded the list of blacklisted Chinese companies to 36. More recently, it has taken the unprecedented view to simply reject the decision of the dispute settlement organ of the World Trade Organization that declared illegal certain restrictions on imports of Chinese steel and aluminum. The argument has been that, and I quote here, the US Trade Representative, the United States maintains that issues of national security cannot be reviewed by in WTO dispute settlement, and the WTO has no authority to second-guess the ability of a WTO member to respond to a wide range of threats to its security. The United States will not cede decision-making over its essential security to WTO parties. a very alarming position, because it essentially means an affirmation of unilateralism and in a sense of the law of the strongest. Pressures have also been accepted on Latin American countries in particular to sever links with Chinese communication companies. Now here clearly the doctrine of active non-alignment would strongly recommend to resist those pressures and retain commercial and technological links with any international companies that can provide the equipment and know-how required in the best conditions. There are some potential US initiatives that may merit further consideration and which are nevertheless controversial. One such is the introduction of so-called climate-based tariffs. That is, tariffs to goods that are produced with consequences for climate change, which are deleterious. At the moment, this is only an idea that is being discussed around in Washington, but it's already elicited concern in China, according to reliable sources, because of its potential protectionist and discriminatory implications. From an active non-alignment perspective, I believe that rather than dismissing this notion at the start, a critical examination of the actual content of the proposal is necessary if it and when it is made forward. In the line of linking more closely trade policy and the environment and environment policy, which I think is a desirable objective, and provided again that the dangers of protectionism and discrimination are warded against. Now, this is made easier by the fact that China at the WTO Trade and Environment Week in October 2022, at the end of its report on a framework for achieving carbon neutrality, informed that it was supporting the WTO as the main channel for coordinated trade policies in pursuit of cooperation in global climate governance. In other words, China is prepared to discuss the possibility of using trade disciplines to try and advance the goals of climate change control. So there is a case in which we can be with the United States in the idea of introducing environmental considerations in the disciplines of trade. But the second area in which active non-alignment approach is highly relevant is that of international economic governance, and it is specifically the reform of the World Trade Organization. There are three major controversial issues here. The first one, the question of the existence of alternative development models. The second, the role of the state in the economy, and questions about subsidies to domestic industries. And the third, the transfer methodology in the context of foreign direct investment. Now, in all these three, there are diametrically opposing views between China on one hand, and the US and the European Union on the other. And I have here in front of me some quotes from official submissions from the United States and the European Union that give a flavor of their views. From a document from the United States entitled China's Trade Disruptive Economic Model, I quote the following. China today maintains a state-led trade disruptive economic model, not based on those fundamental principles of the WTO, and that imposes substantial costs on, presents severe challenges to WTO members. China remains a non-market economy in which the means of production are not sufficiently allocated or priced according to market principles. The United States is saying that China has to alter its development model to fit what they regard as the principles of the WTO. From the EU document on WTO reform, I quote again, the rules of the WTO are not sufficiently effective in tackling the negative spillovers of state intervention in the economy. This is particularly true when state intervention distorts competition in the home market or even in global markets. New rules, I'm still quoting the EU, new rules on industrial subsidies are essential to counter the negative effects of heavy subsidization on international trade, which can generate distortions of competition in both traditional sectors and new technologies. there is a need to identify additional categories of prohibited subsidies. And again, final quote from the EU, state-owned enterprises sorry, I'm missing the quote here, but I get it now. It says the following. State-owned enterprises are in a number of countries an instrument through which the state decisively influences the economy, sometimes with market distorting effects. New international state-owned enterprise rules should focus on the behavior of those companies in their commercial activities. And finally, there is a need, says the EU, for strong rules against practices forcing companies to transfer innovation and technology to the state or to their competitors, so-called forced technology transfer. In other words, the EU is clearly against state intervention in the economy, against subsidizing domestic industry, and against requiring that foreign investors transfer the technology that people can. By contrast, from the Chinese submission of WTO reform, we get a completely different message. And I quote again, China says it is imperative to respect the diversity of development models among members and promote fair competition in the trading system. Action shall be taken in the WTO to uphold the principle of fair competition so as to ensure that enterprises of different ownerships operate in an environment of fair competition. No special or discriminatory disciplines should be instituted on state-owned enterprises in the name of WTO reform. Non-discriminatory treatment should be given to like investments by enterprises with different ownership structures. It's clear from this that the US-EU proposals are essentially an effort at establishing international disciplines that consolidate the model of Anglo-Saxon liberal capitalism and prevent the emergence of alternative models with a stronger state presence and industrial policies with a high degree of sensitivity. Therefore, this proposal should be resisted. An alternative Chinese proposal supported in the WTO in the context of active non-alignment. But there is a twist to this tale. It's interesting because it exemplifies the extent to which active non-alignment should operate on the basis of a variable geometry of allies and partners. Because the Biden administration has been moving away from the anti-industrial policy line that the US has historically followed and has opened up to the implementation of selective policies on substance. In her presentation at a conference on progressive industrial policy, the United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Catherine Tai, made the following statement. Heightened economic insecurity, the pandemic, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine have pushed us, as the United States, to re-examine our approach to trade. The need for direction is clear, and industrial policy is a part of that rebalancing effort. We believe industrial policy and trade policy must complement each other if we are going to realize the goal. Now, this is a statement that active non-aligned governments should no doubt endorse wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Dogendorf. Thanks, Ambassador. Thanks to our Chinese colleagues. It's really a great honor to share this time with you. I will present some reflections about active non-alignment and the new Latin American political landscape. With the election of President Boris in Chile, Petro in Colombia, Lula in Brazil, a new political framework is being created in Latin America. Together with other presidents, such as Alberto Fernandez in Argentina, Luis Arce from Bolivia, Andrés Manuel López Obrador from Mexico, I think they have the disposition and the opportunity to reinforce the Latin American integration process. The reinforce of integration is a very important and urgent task. Latin America has been the region hardest punished by the crisis from a health, economic, and social point of view. At the international level, the region has lost all leadership and is in a serious situation of marginality and irrelevance. There are many factors that have contributed to create this situation. The conservative government, especially in South America, with President Macri, President Piñera, President Duque in Colombia, deepened the disintegration of the region. The most eloquent example was the paralysis of UNASUR and the attempt to replace it by the Forum for the Progress of South American Countries, PROSUR. PROSUR was an ideological revenge attempt. PROSUR is currently an empty complex. Its contribution to something as serious as the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic and social crisis was strictly null. Finally, each country acted individually with practically no type of cooperation between them. Objectively, PROSUR is a ghost institution that nobody takes charge of today. At the international level, the conservative project seeking to recompose the historical alignment of the region with the United States. The failure was packed at the summit of the Americans held in June of this year. Two central issues remain in evidence. The United States doesn't have a proposal for Latin America, and Latin America was unable to have a common voice. This made the great subject of the summit finally was the excluded Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and the absent, starting with Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the Mexican president. The historical alignment of Latin America with respect to the United States shows a negative balance. It is a history of intervention and of undue pressures and imposition. After account, the most determining fact is that no country in the region has managed to accept the status of a developed country. To have some influence on the international scene, Latin America has to build a common position. We support that the only possibility of a common position pass through active non-alignment as a doctrine and guide for action. Alignment on the interest of one power or another will always be resistant and will never be a point of convergence. Non-alignment has a solid structural foundation that results from the new reality that has been created during the last decades. The United States maintain a very important political, cultural, and military influence. But on the other hand, China has become the main commercial partner, most South American countries, is an investor of increasing importance, and is also an essential technological reference. Active non-alignment has a strong roots in historical non-alignment of Nehru, Nasser, Tito. However, we insisted on the nature of the active, because this Latin American non-alignment should be strictly non-alignment. An issue that did not happen in the times of the Cold War, which led Cuba to align with the Soviet Union, which ended up marking the position of the region. The reduce of the integration can be manifested in a concrete way during the next year, with the reactivation of UNASUR. A few weeks ago, a significant group of South American personalities, including 7 former presidents, sent a letter to the 12th president of South America, urging them to return to the path of integration. There is a good chance that South America will move in that direction. The idea is to recover previous assets that UNASUR accumulated, but also establishing new foundations, specifically absolute guarantee of pluralism, incorporation for new actors such as universities and companies, emphasizes on a priority agenda based on sanitary self-sufficiency, energy integration, strengthening of the food supply, physical integration. The construction of a new UNASUR can be a great contribution to the integration effort carried out with the CELAC framework. This instance has a recovery strengthened since 2021 under the President of Mexico and currently under the President of Argentina. In that space, which the region can define a position on major global issues, such as fight against climate change and migration terrorism. And in matter of international politics, we are convinced that active non-alignment can be the point of coverage for countries so important in South America, such as Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Chile, and even Mexico, in North America, which has no doubt a particular relationship with the United States. All the leaders of these countries have declared their will to locate autonomies in the new international scenario under construction and can find in the active non-alignment a guide to recover respect and relevance. Thank you.
Thanks to the authors of the book, Fortín y Carlos Ominami, Jorge Heine. Now we will have our friends from Beijing who will present now. First, we'll have First, we will have Yan Sichue presenting for 10 minutes, followed by Chen Sulong. And afterwards, we'll have a closing remarks from the Chinese ambassador, Liu Qimbao. So, Yang, where you want?
Thank you. Can you see my PPT? Can you see my PPT?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you very much, Ambassador Liu, and also to Professor Heine. We have met with each other so many times on TV and the webinars. Okay. So tonight I'm going to talk about active non-alignment and Latin America. So that's my own personal view about this very interesting topic. So you can see this is my second slide, right? No. Can you see it?
哦，在后边。对，这边没法写，他们找人了，他们在实习的，不然下来看不清。那我们下来，等一会儿。
So first of all, I'm going to talk about the definition of alignment or alliance, as Professor Heine also mentioned just now. Well, I would say there are two different meanings. One is taking sides. The second is something like forming a military alliance. NATO is a military alliance. China-Russia partnership is not a military alliance. Okay, so let's be clear that we have different understanding of the meaning of alignment, alliance, or partnership. We say we make partnerships, but not a military alliance. Okay. So this is my first point. Now the second point. So you can see my second PPT, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what is Latin America's own interests? The book by Professor Heine and your colleagues argues that rather than letting themselves be pressured to side either with Washington or with Beijing in a nascent Second Cold War, Latin American countries should focus on their own interests. Now, this is very interesting. You know, every country has its own interest. And what is the interests of Latin American countries? We must understand the meaning of Latin American countries' own interests. Well, here, let me quote Carlos Escudé, who is from Argentina. He was a scholar of international relations, and as you know that he passed away just on the New Year's Day last year of COVID virus. And he was well known for his international theory called peripheral realism. Carlos Escudé said, in the market of industrialized soy products, Trump did Argentina this favor. He unwittingly made Argentina relevant. But Argentina should help itself by increasing its strategic relevance in other fields. For example, signing important defense agreements with China. With this in mind, he said, I proposed leasing out the unused airstrip of Eniaco to China as an airbase. I'm sure the Americans would make a big deal of this grand strategic move. Argentina's value would increase, both for China and for the US. The greater the US-China rivalry, the better for Argentina. Okay, so when I hear the talk made by Professor Heine and your colleagues just now, so I was always thinking about, is it true that the greater the US-China confrontation, the better for Argentina, for Chile, for Latin America? Well, this is a very important question we need to ask. So let me repeat. So in the face of the US-China confrontation, what is the interest of Latin America? Somebody say there's a British scholar said every country is selfish. Every country thinks of himself first. So is it true that in a globalized world, every country, including those from Latin America, is selfish? Well, let's discuss. Third, China's foreign policy. China consistently pursues an independent foreign policy. It makes partnership, but not military allies. Okay, so until now, you cannot say China has made any military allies with any foreign country, including Russia. China has built more than 120 different partnerships with all kinds of countries around the world. No military alliance with any country in the world. Okay, so I think my colleague, Professor Chen, will tell you more about China's foreign policy with this partnership. Now, we need to ask, will this policy be changed? Well, you know, we have 1.4 billion people. We have so many scholars. So different scholars have different opinions. And here, let me tell you a very interesting argument by one or two Chinese scholars. Well, this is the paper written by two professors from a university in Northeast China, a normal university. They say, actually, this is the translation of this topic, the title of the paper, a new understanding of non-alignment, a possibility of the adjustment of China's diplomatic strategy. Okay, so let me just translate the main argument into the following slide. They say, in the early stage of reform and opening up, China chose the policy of non-alignment after considering domestic and foreign factors, such as historical lessons, security needs, and interest value. With the improvement of China's national strength and the change of international and domestic environment, the applicability of non-aligned policy has been questioned. Okay, so let me repeat. The applicability of non-aligned policy has been questioned. With the advent of a centenarial of changes in international relations and the summary of 70 years of experience in China's foreign strategy, there is a possibility of a large-scale adjustment for China's foreign policy. Okay, so my understanding that they want to change the foreign policy of China. They say at the conceptual level, the non-aligned policy will be restructured, while at the practical level, China may adopt a new approach between non-aligned policy and alliance policy by upgrading the security content of the existing partnership network and selecting and helping key geo-partners to meet the needs of national interests and enterprising security. Well, this is the the translation by these two scholars. I don't think the translation is good, but you can understand the basic meaning of these two scholars. Okay, so this is very interesting. Professor Chen will tell you how many scholars in China agree with this kind of view. Okay, my comment: China is against the military alliance, so it will not abandon its foreign policy of non-alignment. Indeed, China-Russia relations meet with no ceilings. Let me repeat, no ceilings. But it does not mean they will establish a military alliance. Last question, last point for my PPT. What should Latin America do? Well, according to the paper by Fortín, Heine, and Ominami, Latin America between a rock and a hard place, a second Cold War, and the active non-aligned option, global policy, October 2020. Okay, according to your argument, Washington's message is that the traditional position of American foreign ministries of wanting to have good relations with both with the US and China is unacceptable, and that the time has come to choose between Washington and Beijing. Agenda for active non-alignment as the option, strengthening regionalism, reorienting foreign policy towards Asia and Africa, grasping that there are new international financial institutions, keeping an equal distance from both superpowers in fueling geopolitical and geo-economic rivalry. Okay, so I would say these arguments are very powerful and very important. So this option is very important. My comment. China hopes that America will take no sides between the US-China confrontation. Okay, so this is very important. But, okay, please pay attention to this sentence, to my argument. But some Latin American countries still keep Huawei's 5G out of the doors and or refuse to sign a document of cooperation for the Belt Road. Does it mean that they have taken sides? I need the answer from our Latin American colleagues. Okay, so Professor Heine and your colleagues will tell me, does this mean they have taken sides already? Concluding remarks. Latin America needs to pursue an active alignment. The agenda for active non-alignment is important, but it's easier said than done. Some of the 33 countries in the region will stand closer to either the US or China. Thank you very much. And you know, in China we have a very well-known proverb called the bird and the clam. Okay, so look at this bird and the clam. The bird wants to eat the meat of the clam, and the clam wants to protect itself so that the clam does not allow the bird to go. Then the fisherman is very happy because they are fighting with each other. Okay, so Latin America is a fisherman and the elephant and the grass. This is an African proverb. When the two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffered. Or we can say, when the two elephants fight, it is Latin America that suffers. So Latin America will be the grass, or Latin America will be the fisherman. Okay, you know the answer.
Thanks, Yang. Very illustrative. So now let's move to Cheng Chulong, Professor Chulong, and so after Professor Chulong's presentation, we'll have the ambassador. So you have 10 minutes, Cheng.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start with the big question. Are you guys crazy about the World Cup championship? Congratulations on Latin America, on Argentina, on Messi. I'm a fan of Messi. So last night is sleepless. And I realized that China has a lot to learn from Latin America, not only in terms of football. I'm very glad to attend this important and meaningful event. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for the three distinguished speakers, as well as Professor Jiang, that helped me have a better understanding of active non-alignment doctrine, as well as its implications for foreign policy option. I have learned a lot from your wonderful presentations. To me, the active non-alignment doctrine is sensible, wise, adaptive, constructive, and cooperative. I think this new doctrine will bring non-aligned movement to a new era. Latin America, and the Caribbean can play a bigger role in and make greater contribution to the non-aligned movement or NAM. Definitely, the new doctrine is progressive and more advanced compared to the old doctrine of non-aligned movement. I totally agree with this. Unlike the Cold War non-aligned movement, which focused primarily on defending members from the great powers, active non-alignment seeks to deepen relations with larger countries, recognizing the benefits of globalization and the need for global cooperation on issues such as climate change. I think this is very right. From a Chinese scholar's view, the active non-alignment doctrine is both valuable and useful to China's two major pursuits. One is the pursuit of building a community with a shared future for mankind. The other is the pursuit of a new type of international relationship. I will elaborate on this afterwards. There are two key issues, however, need our deeper and more careful consideration. One is about the Second Cold War, the concept. You see, we are at the dawn of a Second Cold War, this time not between the United States and the Soviet Union, but between the United States and the People's Republic of China. In this new version, the year 2020 is the equivalent of 1950. It's hard for me to fully agree on this judgment. It seems to me that neither China nor the United States seek a new Cold War. Actually, the United States make this very clear. On 14th November this year, President Xi Jinping had a meeting with US President Joe Biden in Bali, Indonesia. The two presidents had a candid and in-depth exchange of views on issues of strategic importance in China-US relations and on major global and regional issues. President Biden reaffirmed that a stable and prosperous China is good for the United States and the world. The United States respects China's system and does not seek to change it. The United States does not seek a new Cold War, does not seek to revitalize alliances against China, does not support Taiwan independence, does not support two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan, and has no intention to have a conflict with China. The US side has no intention to seek decoupling from China, to halt China's economic development or to contain China. And China, of course, has no intention to fight a new Cold War. We don't like it at all. I think if your active non-alignment doctrine prevails, hopefully the so-called Second Cold War would be eventually avoided. The other issue is about China. Refer China to the Soviet Union either by analogy or by structural analysis could be mistaken. China in the West media is not as real as it should be. China has become a major trading partner for more than 140 countries and regions. It leads the world in total volume of trade in goods, and it is a major destination for global investment and a leading country in outbound investment. China will pursue a more proactive strategy of opening up. China will establish and strengthen various partnerships across the globe. When we talk about the active non-alignment doctrine, a question comes to me. By comparison, what's the advantage of the doctrine compared to the opposite alignment doctrine? You know that the 30 Years' War, World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict all took place in Europe. Ironically, Europeans used to adopt alignment doctrine. Both history and reality have proven that alliances like NATO will create divisive security lines and different security levels which lead to security dilemma. NATO will do harm to common security and universal security. I think only active non-alignment doctrine and policy can make common and universal security available to the whole world. Based on active non-alignment doctrine, may China and Latin America and the Caribbean countries can work together to put the global security initiative put forth by President Xi Jinping into action. Now let me talk about China's doctrine on partnership based on non-alignment doctrine. Let me start with the historical contribution China made to the non-aligned movement. You know, China in the 1950s put forth the 5 peaceful coexistence principles. And in 1955, at the Bandung conference, Premier Zhou Enlai at that time made a great contribution to the success of the conference. China always supported NAM. China has been an observer of NAM for 30 years and has developed a very good relationship with NAM. Last October, State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi delivered a speech to a high-level meeting commemorating the 60th anniversary of the founding of the non-aligned movement. For China, partnership based on non-alignment doctrine means equal and reciprocal partnership. By comparison, for the United States and other Western countries, partnership is only secondary to allies. Allies are higher than partners. In the report to the 20th National Congress of the CPC of China, China adheres to the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence in pursuing friendship and cooperation with other countries. It is committed to promoting a new type of international relations, deepening and expanding global partnerships based on equality, openness, and cooperation, and broadening the convergence of interests with other countries. China works to enhance coordination and positive interaction with other major countries to build major country relations, fostering peaceful coexistence, overall stability, and balanced development. Acting on the principle of amity, sincerity, mutual benefit, and inclusiveness, and the policy of forging friendships and partnerships with its neighbors, China strives to enhance friendly ties, mutual trust, and converging in interests with its neighboring countries. Guided by the principles of sincerity, real results, affinity, and good faith, and with the commitment to the greater good and shared interests, China endeavors to strengthen solidarity and cooperation with other developing countries and safeguard the common interests of the developing world. Now, I end my speech with the following words. China is dedicated to promoting a human community with a shared future. Developing partnerships based on the non-alignment is the right way to go. The active non-alignment doctrine is both valuable and useful to our equal and reciprocal partnerships. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Chen. Now we will have Ambassador Liu Bao with closing remarks.
Hello, Professor, ladies and gentlemen, great event. This is a very successful seminar addressed by high caliber scholars and attended by very promising students of international relations. Ambassador Jorge Heine elaborated on the concept of non-alignment and the interconnection between the concept with the non-aligned movement. He mentioned bipolar world. For your information, China does not want to see a bipolar world. We are not definitely one of the two poles. We want the world to be a multipolar world, and we want the international relations to be democratized rather than centralized. Professor Carlos Fortín discussed how developing countries, Latin American countries in particular, can seize the opportunities and meet the challenges of global economic governance through active non-alignment. Well, he also mentioned who writes the rules. Again, China does not want to see the rules to be written by one or a small number of countries. We want that all countries have the equal right to participate in the writing of the rules. Mr. Carlos Ominami talked about the importance of an active non-alignment policy with regard to the collective self-empowerment and self-autonomy of Latin American countries. Now, he also mentioned frequently UNASUD. Now, everyone knows that UNASUD is his pet project. Professor Jiang Shixue interpreted the significance of active non-alignment on Latin America. And the two questions of why the bird and the crab and the two elephants fighting is very interesting. Professor Chen Xurong appealed to push for the creation of a human community with a shared future through application of an active non-alignment policy. Well, each and every one of the speech is very insightful and thought-provoking. We can see different perspectives and different focuses of each speaker, but there is something common to all of them. And I think all of them, each and every one of them, has high regards of non-alignment, and they think that non-alignment or active non-alignment is beneficial to Latin America and the world at large. Well, historically, China has had a long and special connection with the non-aligned movement. Although not a member, China is an observer of the movement, and our connection dates back to even before the founding of the movement. As a matter of fact, China contributed to the major philosophies of non-alignment. The 5 principles of peaceful coexistence was first proposed by Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai in the early 1950s, to solve political disputes between India and China. Well, when the Cold War was in full swing and the national independence movement was gaining momentum in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, one of the founders of the non-alignment movement, based his non-alignment philosophy on the aforementioned 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And these principles were incorporated in the 1955 Bandung Conference, another milestone leading to the founding of the movement in this 10-point declaration on the promotion of world peace and cooperation, and thus were endorsed by the international community as basic norms governing international relations. Thus, it is not inappropriate to say that the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence and the philosophy of non-alignment go hand in hand and are interdependent and mutually enriching. Both are testimony to developing countries longing for national independence and sovereignty, international justice and equality, and both are historical contribution to the democratization of international relations. China has been consistent in supporting the countries and the peoples of Latin America in their struggle for national independence and sovereignty. In 1964, Chairman Mao delivered a speech to resolutely support Panama's just cause to recover its sovereignty over the Panama Canal Zone. When Latin American countries appealed for the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free Latin America in 1960s, the Chinese government issued statements to express its respect and support for the righteous proposal. Throughout the 1970s, China repeatedly supported Latin America's position against the superpowers' maritime hegemony and their just cause to protect their national resources and establish a new international economic order. When SELAC Summit declared Latin America a zone of peace in 2014, China actively responded to it and placed it as the basis of China-SELAC cooperation. Today, there are many synergies between active non-alignment and Chinese visions and proposals. As elaborated by the speakers, active non-alignment has adopted the philosophy of the non-alignment movement and made adjustments in accordance with the changes in global situation and the Latin American conditions. China, in the meantime, following the trend of the times of peace, development, cooperation, and win-win, and based on its own national conditions and diplomatic tradition, adheres to the policy of non-alignment, befriends all countries possible, push for an equal, open, cooperative global partnership and new type of international relationship, and has opened a new path to international relations featured by dialogue instead of confrontation and partnership over an alliance. China remains committed to an independent foreign policy of peace, and the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence decide its position on the merits of the matter itself, like Professor Heine, Ambassador Heine just said. China will continue to stand shoulder by shoulder with other developing countries, proceed from the greater good and shared interests, and work for common development. Thanks to the pandemic and the global changes, both of a scale unseen in a century, our world is experiencing unprecedented turbulence and uncertainties. Some countries stubbornly follow zero-game mentality and put their own national interests above other countries, apply unilateralism and block confrontations. Their behaviors seriously undermine international solidarity and inclusive cooperation. Both being developing countries and mutual partners of equality, mutual benefit, and common development, China and Latin American countries are closely bonded together with the common dream of self-autonomy and development. In today's world, we should hold high the banner of multilateralism and South-South cooperation, commit to partnership instead of alliance, join hands to meet the challenges and overcome difficulties, and create an international environment favorable for developing countries. China is ready to work with Latin America to play the following roles. First, continue to be a contributor to global development. Development is the key to people's happiness. At the 76th session of the UN General Assembly, President Xi Jinping proposed the Global Development Initiative. Putting the people at the center, this initiative is a rallying call to refocus attention of the international community on development and build a global community of development. The initiative calls on all countries to strengthen cooperation in 8 areas, including poverty reduction, food security, and climate change. In his video address at the 3rd ministerial meeting of the China-SELAC Forum held in early December last year, President Xi welcomed Latin American countries to join the Global Development Initiative and build a community with shared future for global development. It is in our common interests to work together to answer the calls of our times such as a post-COVID economic recovery and happiness for the people. Second, continue to be an advocate of a new type of international relations featuring mutual respect, equity and justice, and a win-win cooperation. Hegemonism and power politics were wrong and did not work in the past. They are equally wrong and less likely to work today. China will continue to support Latin American countries in safeguarding sovereignty and self-autonomy, solidarity for self-empowerment, and independently exploring development paths suited to their national conditions and holding their future firmly in their own hands. China is willing to strengthen synergy between the Global Security Initiative and Latin America's earnest wish of making Latin America a zone of peace. In international affairs, China stands ready to work with Latin America to jointly safeguard equity and justice and champion for developing countries. Facing global challenges, we should be dedicated to promoting a human community with a shared future, undertake the responsibility together, and promote win-win cooperation. Third, continue to be a practitioner of multilateralism. Multilateralism is not a choice, it's a must. China is ready to join Latin America to practice true multilateralism, protect the United Nations status and function, safeguard the authority of international laws and international order, uphold the purposes and principles of the United Nations. We should stand against the Cold War mentality, oppose the practice of a small number of countries imposing their wills and rules on other countries. We should pursue a vision of global governance featuring shared growth through discussion and collaboration. The representation and importance of developing countries in international affairs should be expanded and elevated. Fourth, continue to be a model of international cooperation. In essence, China-SELAC cooperation is South-South cooperation. It is our common and voluntary choice. China has no geopolitical interests, does not seek its own sphere of influence, and does not engage in the so-called strategic gaming in Latin America. China-SELAC cooperation is in our mutual needs. It does not target at any third party and should not be subject to third-party interference. Latin American countries are independent sovereign countries. China is happy to see Latin American countries develop their relationships with other countries and believe that all countries are entitled to conduct parallel partnerships with Latin America from third-party interference, free from third-party interference. As a matter of fact, these partnerships can be and should be mutually complementary and mutually enriching. As long as Latin American countries prefer, China is willing to engage in tripartite or multilateral cooperation in Latin America, create a bigger cake that benefits all parties. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, SELAC countries are going through a new round of deep and far-reaching changes and transformations. These changes and transformations have offered new opportunities to take the China-SELAC relations into a new era featuring equality, mutual benefit, innovation, openness, and benefits for the people. Guided by the principles of sincerity, real results, affinity, and good faith, and with a commitment to the greater good and shared interest, China endeavors to strengthen solidarity and cooperation with SELAC, share development opportunities with countries, and achieve common development. Today's seminar has been very productive and thought-provoking. It helps deepen our mutual understanding and expand our consensus. It is our task to enhance China-SELAC cooperation, strengthen our dialogue and exchanges on governance, elevate our solidarity and coordination on global as well as regional issues, and continuously empower forces for human progress. Once more, I extend my heartiest thanks to Chile 21 Foundation, Institute of International Studies of the University of Chile, and a Permanent Forum of Foreign Politics for kindly co-hosting this seminar. Professor Lopez, Professor Dockendorf. Professor Lopez is here. Oh, how are you? Good to see you again. Professor Gordon, you have been a very good host. And my gratitude goes to Mr. Carlos Ominami, Ambassador Jorge Heine, Professor Carlos Fortín, Professor Jiang Shixue, and Professor Chen Xurong for their marvelous remarks. And I thank the University of Chile for the venue and logistics. Finally, my thanks also go to my colleagues, my team at the embassy, without whose liaison and coordination this seminar would not have been possible. Now I declare the close of the seminar. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Sí. Dorotea, sola. Tiene aquí una foto.
Con la directora.
Hola.
Bye-bye.
Taking time for-
Ambassador, please join us.